In early 2026, the Middle East was pushed right to the edge. A 6-week war between Iran, the United States, and Israel threatened to become a massive, catastrophic conflict. And then, it just stopped. So, how did a war that was about to set the entire region on fire suddenly get put on pause? Let's get into it.
This is the message the world got from the U.S. president on April 7th. It's a chilling, apocalyptic threat suggesting a level of destruction that's hard to even imagine. It really felt like this was it, the point of no return.
And yet, just hours after that warning, the world was absolutely stunned. The U.S. and Iran had agreed to a ceasefire. So, what gives? How did we go from threatening to wipe out a civilization to a truce in a matter of hours? That's the core question we're going to explore.
Now, to understand that sudden peace, we first have to wrap our heads around the war itself. This wasn't some long, drawn-out affair. No, this was a fast, brutal 6-week blitz that completely redrew the region's political and military map.
It all kicked off with a huge surprise attack on February 28th. And get this, they assassinated Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. As you can imagine, Iran's response was swift and devastating. They hit U.S. bases, they hit Gulf allies, and they shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which basically put a chokehold on the global economy. After 6 weeks of this insane back and forth, a fragile ceasefire was suddenly on the table.
So, how in the world did we get to this point? Well, this explosion of violence didn't come out of nowhere. The road to war was paved over months with rising tensions, serious internal turmoil inside Iran, and a total collapse of diplomacy.
It really starts in late 2025. You have these massive anti-government protests sweeping across Iran, the biggest since the 1979 revolution. The government cracks down hard. In January 2026, security forces kill thousands of protesters. In response, the U.S. starts its largest military buildup in the region since the Iraq War. And then, the final straw. On February 27th, last-ditch nuclear talks just fall apart, only hours before the first bombs drop.
And right here, on the very eve of war, you see two completely different stories being told. You've got Iran's foreign minister saying a historic deal was, quote, within reach. But at the same time, the U.S. envoy is telling the world that Iran flat out rejected their proposals and was bragging about being able to build 11 nuclear bombs. I mean, these two realities just can't exist at the same time.
All right, so diplomacy is officially dead. The conflict begins. Let's walk through the timeline of this incredibly fast, incredibly destructive 6-week war.
The U.S. and Israel launched their attack under the codename Operation Epic Fury. And it was designed for one thing: maximum shock and impact, aiming right for the head of the Iranian regime. The first week was just wild. It starts with the assassination of Supreme Leader Khamenei. That's not just a military strike, it's a psychological blow practically guaranteed to cause a massive response. And it did. Iran launches Operation True Promise 4, and, crucially, they shut down the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping. The conflict immediately spills over the border, with Hezbollah attacking Israel, kicking off the separate but very connected 2026 Lebanon War.
Okay, so after that initial shock, the war moves into a new, grimmer phase. This is where both sides really dig in. Iran gets a new supreme leader, but the campaign of targeted assassinations from the air just keeps going.
The late supreme leader's son, Mojtaba Khomeini, is named as his successor. Then, the fight turns to the economy. Israel hits critical Iranian oil and gas facilities. They also take out another senior official, Ali Larijani, in an airstrike, which triggers a retaliatory strike from Iran on an oil refinery in Haifa, Israel.
In the final weeks of the war, the rhetoric gets even hotter and the stakes get even higher. We start seeing direct ultimatums. New players join the fight, and the conflict reaches its absolute most dangerous point, right before it all suddenly stops.
So you've got President Trump issuing a 48-hour ultimatum: reopen the Strait of Hormuz or else. Then the Houthis in Yemen officially jump in, firing missiles at Israel. U.S. and Israeli strikes start hitting civilian targets, including a major bridge. And then, right after that chilling threat we started with, the one about destroying a civilization, a ceasefire is announced. So, the fighting may have stopped, but the damage was already done. Even in just 6 weeks, the war took a devastating toll, not just on Iran and Israel, but on the entire region and, really, the global economy. Let's break down that staggering cost. Just look at this number:
1.2 million. That's how many people in Lebanon were forced from their homes in just over a month. That figure includes 350,000 children. It created one of the world's most severe and fastest-growing displacement crises, seemingly overnight.
And to put that in perspective, this chart really shows you the scale of the crisis. At over 20% of its population, the level of displacement in Lebanon became grimly comparable to some of the worst humanitarian crises of our time, like those in Ukraine and Syria. And economically? Well, closing the Strait of Hormuz was like a body blow to the entire world. Think of it as a global oil superhighway. Shutting it down sent oil prices skyrocketing by over 40%. It was called the single largest supply disruption since the energy crisis back in the 1970s. And then, of course, you have the devastating human cost. The casualties spanned multiple nations, which just goes to show how wide the conflict's deadly reach was. You're looking at thousands killed in Iran and Lebanon, and dozens more casualties in Iraq, Israel, the US, and the UAE.
Which brings us right back to that incredibly fragile ceasefire. It stopped the fighting, yeah, but it left a trail of destruction and a future that is deeply, deeply uncertain. So the big question is, what comes next?
The agreement itself is called the Islamabad Accord. It set up an initial 2-week ceasefire, and as part of the deal, Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But, and this is a huge but, both sides made it very clear that this was temporary. This was not a full end to the war. More talks were scheduled to happen in Pakistan. And this quote from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it really gives you a window into Israel's thinking. He calls the conflict a war of revival, and says they inflicted 10 plagues on the axis of evil. And for him, that axis isn't just Iran, it's also Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. It suggests a much, much bigger set of goals than just what happened in those 6 weeks. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, the one everybody is asking. Was this ceasefire just a temporary pause, a chance for both sides to rearm and re-strategize before the next round? Or could this, just maybe, be the first shaky step towards some kind of lasting peace? Right now, the region, and the rest of the world, is holding its breath.